Hello, my name is Tony Cooke, and I have the privilege of traveling to hundreds of churches around the country. And one of the challenges I always see pastors dealing with is that time when it comes to build a building. And pastors are trained for so many areas. They're trained for preaching and praying and hospital visiting and all that. But one thing that pastors don't have a lot of training for is how to build a church building. And I've really come to appreciate over the years my friend Charlie Daniels of Daniels and Daniels here in Oklahoma, and but he works all over the country, and he's been able to help pastors with their church buildings. But one of the things I really appreciate is not just Charlie's technical expertise, but I appreciate the fact that he grew up in a pastor's home, and he grew up helping his dad build churches, and he has a real heart to help pastors because of his upbringing. Charlie, tell us about your dad.
Well, my dad was a Assembly of God pastor, and my dad is 87 now, still living, not doing as well as he was at one time. But
you said he was still up on the roof a few years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago.
Get up there and work around?
And my dad would build churches. He would start a church. I would call him a pioneer, where he'd go and start a church, build the facility. And then 4 or 5 years, he would move on. Hard worker, new construction. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it. I think there's very, very few cut out to do that. But he did a really good job. I've always been proud of what he did. And I can go to Eastern North Carolina and still see the churches that he built. And I did have to work with him.
Right.
My dad would work you.
How old were you when you started helping your dad build churches?
I was just a kid. I mean, as long as I can remember, he'd have us toting blocks or whatever. I remember working on the Assemblies of God campground as just a little kid toting blocks. So I grew up with the knowledge of how to build. You know, my dad, not only did he work us at the church, he would send me out. One lady was a widow woman, and he sent me over there to fix her roof. And I recall she paid me in socks.
And Charlie doesn't work for socks anymore.
No, not at all. But I needless to say, I was disappointed. But that was my dad, and he was always doing something for somebody and working in the church.
One of the things I think that this has created in Charlie's life is a heart for pastors. You know, because it's not just a business transaction to you, very business-like, and you treat it as a business, but Charlie understands the personal dimensions of pastors, their calling, their assignment, their mission, and I just think that uniquely qualifies you to do an exceptional job for these churches.
Thank you, Tony. We do have a heart for churches, for pastors, and we believe we're called to serve.
Yeah. Charlie, one of the things I want pastors to have is a perspective of your level of experience. How many, not just specific churches that you've built, but how many projects have you been involved in from various aspects of churches, the planning, the preparing, all that? What's your range, church size, small, big? Give us a thought on that.
Tony, it's been a lifetime. I hate to tell you, I'm 57. I know I'm younger than you, but I'm 57, and I've been doing this since I was a kid. I built hundreds of churches, projects, houses, condos, banks, post office, restaurants, just about any type of construction. We've been involved in it. And you know, the good thing is today, when you're building a church, you're going to build the coffee shop. You're going to build the library, the bookstore, the sound, lights, and video, which is performing art style things. You know, some of the guys that we work with in sound, lights, and video, they work with people such as Joel Osteen, such as Celine Dion, such as the top artists in the country. So these type of guys are doing work on churches today, and so I got a really wide spectrum of what we have done.
Yeah, I know you've been involved with churches that seat up to 7,500.
Yes,
and as few as
as few as 10 probably.
Okay, all right.
You know, when you go back to when my dad was preaching, you go to
Okay.
a church and they would be 10 or 15 people,
Okay.
and you started from there. And you know, we do some really small projects that are big to the people who are doing them.
Right.
They're big projects to them. We try to treat them as such. It's all about getting people born again, getting them into the kingdom.
Yeah.
No matter what size it is.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about how pastors need to be realistic. Jesus said, "Count the cost." And do you find sometimes that pastors, because they have faith, they want to get, maybe bite off more than they can chew? How does a pastor go about being realistic in planning?
I think pastors are like all of us. We all want more than we can get sometimes. And, they're pressing for as much as they can get. But you should start with a realistic budget. When I say a realistic budget, count all the cost. Have a budget. We have a budget sheet, and it'll have items on there that you probably won't ever do. But when we first start a project, we'll go through each one of those budget items to make sure that we're accounting for everything. Now we've created these over the years so that we don't forget them.
Right.
And so we want to help you get through that budget process, but it needs to be realistic. You need to know what you're going to put in the building, and some of that comes from the pastors need help from architects, engineers, interior designers, civil engineers, making sure that everything's included on the site. Those are the type things that will help you come up with a realistic budget that you can stick to. How many times have all of us said, "Well, we're going to get on a budget at our house, and we'll do it too low," and nobody could live on that budget. And so having a realistic budget, having goals that are achievable, it's going to make your life a lot easier as a pastor.
Excellent. Do churches have to establish not just where they want to be, but where they are right now? What do we currently owe? What's our realistic day-to-day assessment of things, in addition to where we want to be as we move into this project?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things you need to do is, do you owe any money? Are you saving any money? Are you able to make a payment if you're going to borrow money? We run into churches sometimes now that will say, we want to do it all on cash. And that is a great idea if you have the type of revenue where you could do it in a reasonable amount of time. And the other thing is that a church will be, you'll find out that they owe $1 million on their property or something, and it makes it really hard to add that to a budget.
Okay. So this is where timing comes in, sequencing, and dealing with it as a process. It
is a process. Tony, one of the big things, I'm glad you said process. It just triggers my memory. People tend to think that building a church or building a house, whatever, they can go down, just pick it out, and they're done. When you start to build a church, it is a process. It's going to take you some time. Stay the course. Keep doing the process. You'll get there. But you can't be hit and miss. You have to stay the course and keep doing it. It is a process. We've done one project where it took 5 years just to get through the city, the permitting. So definitely it's a process.
Let's talk about church income and church borrowing.
Okay. On church income, one of the questions we like to ask first is, what is your annual income? Now, a lot of times they'll have a problem telling me that. They think that I'm trying to find out their finances or what's going on. But the only way I can help them in creating a real budget is to know exactly what kind of income they have. If I know the amount of money you have coming in, then I can know approximately how much you can borrow. And I can tell you that actually before you go to a bank. I can actually tell you about how much you can borrow. This way, we can set the budget based on what you really can borrow.
Charlie, we've been talking about loans. Tell us about bonds versus conventional.
But bonds are a system in which you can get money where you really couldn't get that amount from a lender. So they'll loan you more money. The fees will be higher. There's a few good things about bonds in the fact that, yes, the fees are higher, but you get a fixed rate of interest for 25 years or for 20 years. It's fixed. Whereas if you go to a conventional lender, it's going to be 5 years, and you're going to be redoing the loan. Mm-hmm. So bonds are a good way to go. A lot of churches go that way. But if you can go conventional, it's going to save you money.
Are there any particular traps out there that churches get into, things that sound good initially? And,
yes.
And what are some of the warnings? What are some of the things that...
Well, the one Mama told you about. If it sounds too good to be true, yeah. It's too good to be true. So we do see those, and it seems like over the last few years they've happened a lot more where churches will get a call and they're going to be loaned all this money. Some family wants to loan them this amount of money, that type of thing, and they'll want a certain amount of money to give them that money, like 10% down. And anytime you got to pay money to get money, don't do it. You know, that's the wrong system.
What about cash on hand? I know a lot of times churches, you know, they've been, and we talked about this earlier, they've purchased land, they've had a lot of outlay, maybe a lot of their money's gone toward that. They want to start the build. What about cash on hand?
Churches should have cash on hand. They should have it all the time. What we do see is we see churches that they've paid their church off. They've been sitting there for 20 years. They've done really well. They've given the missions. They've taken care of the poor. They've done a lot of different things, but they have no cash on hand.
We've already talked about the fact, Charlie, that a building program is a process, not an event. Pastor doesn't just decide one day, let's build a building and bingo, it starts. It can be a multi-year process. How does a church begin to prepare, even well in advance? How do they begin to prepare for this process?
You know, one of the things that I would do is I would have the church start making a payment to themselves. This is something we've told churches over and over again. Before you actually need the loan, let's say you're saying we're going to borrow $1 million or $2 million. Figure out what that payment is. Start making it to yourself while you're going through the planning process. The planning process is going to take you a minimum of 6 months. And then with cities and all like they are, it may take you a year or 2 years. But if you'll take and cut a check to yourself every month, it's going to do two things for you. One, it's going to save you some money. You can put money in your account. But two, it's going to make you feel comfortable that I can make that payment. A lot of churches, they'll get the loan, but they've never been exposed to making a payment of $20,000 or $30,000 a month. All of a sudden, it's putting a lot of stress on their bank account, on their funds, and that they're not used to. So I would encourage you to make a payment to yourself.
Charlie, I don't think either one of us are going to run a marathon, but if we were, we'd have to build up to it. And is that discipline building up to it gradually, as opposed to just massive, abrupt cuts and changes in finances advisable?
Yeah, that's what I was really saying in making a payment to yourself, and do some budget cuts during that time, so that you're making that adjustment before you get into a fixed mortgage. You know, one thing we've seen is that in a couple occasions where a church built a really nice facility, nice offices, only to come and have to lay off people to continue to make that payment. Here's the deal. You will make that mortgage payment. I mean, you're going to make that mortgage payment, and the banks will make sure of it. So make sure that you can make it gradually. Do some things before you get into a building program that you're prepared for it.
I heard a pretty smart guy say one time that there's only 3 ways to make a profit. Number 1 is to increase revenue. Number 2 is to decrease expenses. And number 3 is to do a combination of those two. He said the problem with preachers is they only understand the first one. And so it's not unwise, it's not inappropriate to make healthy budgetary cuts and to establish what are our priorities and then budget accordingly.
That's exactly.
Make the cuts when necessary. Do you see churches have trouble staying on budget?
They do. And I think a lot of that is how you prepare for the budget. We've had good success in preparing churches for the budget and for what's going to happen to them during the process. If you prepare correctly, you have a good understanding of the budget, you can hit your budget. I don't think in the last 5 or 6 years, but we've had but one that really ran over budget. And we have budget meetings on a monthly basis. You have to do that to make sure you're staying on budget. Communicate well from the pastor's side, from the church's side to us, and we communicate well to you as a builder and a designer.
Do you do budgeting in phases? Do you have different, revenues and allocations for certain phases of the project? How do you do that?
Well, one thing that I like to do is I like to do a project, and because when you first start planning, you don't know exactly what those costs are going to be. So if you can have another open area or another room that's attached that you can go ahead and plan, you may not do it, and you may do it. One church that comes to mind, we had 4 classes that was attached to it that we didn't think we'd be able to finish off. But as the budget numbers came in, they came in better than what we anticipated. So we were able to get those 4 classes finished. So yes, phasing it. The other thing about phasing is when you design a building, design it so you could build it in phases. Structurally, a lot of times they design them so the structure's all one piece. So you think in your mind, well, I'll just cut it in half and we'll build only half of it. That's not true, because structurally it was designed to be one piece. So when you're designing the building, make sure you design it so that it can be built in 2 to 3 pieces. And it makes it really easy.
This involves forethought.
Yes.
This means you've got to think through kind of a master plan. And think through, so otherwise you'll proverbially paint yourself into a corner.
One thing I'm doing right now, actually tomorrow I go through a guy's plans, and we will cut that building up in 3 pieces, and we'll give him numbers for each 3 pieces. He's anticipating that he'll do all of it at one time. But by breaking it down like this, he'll see what each individual piece will cost him, and we could stop anywhere in between. Gives him the option.
Yeah. And I don't want to keep bringing up all these cliches, but how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Yes. Charlie, in all this budgeting, all this planning, all these projections, what is the hardest area for you to project costs?
Tony, that would be site cost. When you're dealing with a site, we go out and we take core samples, and that is, we drill a hole in there and we test the soils and all that to see what's in there. But you're only taking a sample. So you take that sample on an acre, and you may take 2 or 3. But that don't guarantee that when you start digging, you're not going to run in rock or bad soil and have to take them out. You remember when we did Rama, you've heard this many times, I'm sure, how we took out 4 feet of dirt from under the building. Well, if you don't anticipate that, that's a major cost. And sometimes you just can't anticipate those problems you have under the ground. Also in site costs, you got to run interference with the city for city utilities and water lines, sewer lines, fire lines, gas lines, all those type of things. And they may be on the other side of the street. They may not be within a mile of there. We just did a project this last year where I think it was 11 miles we had to run the water line. So those are the things that are big costs, and you run into all kinds of situations in site costs.
Allocation. Idealistically, in a perfect world where a church had unlimited funds, they would put, optimum quality into every aspect of the building. But I'm guessing that churches have to decide where we can invest the most, and what do we want to be the absolute best, and then where can we do some, acceptable, good things, but maybe not put as much investment. How do churches decide that?
There's projects that are design driven. Most projects we do and most churches are budget driven. And design driven would mean that you could come in, have a great designer and interior decorators do anything they wanted to do, and it would be a great project.
That means unlimited money.
Unlimited money. Right. And but most of them are budget driven. So the things that we really like for the church to focus on is front of stage, to where they come in and you got a really good look. Lobby, in your lobbies, make sure you're making a great first impression, and the ladies' bathroom. And those are the really key points. And in talking about front of stage today, it's done more with lighting and sound and video. And we really encourage you to get a good video guy on and right at the first of your project, so that you can have a really good look in front of stage.
Don't do the audio and video after.
No, please.
Do all that up front.
Yes.
Invest in that at the beginning.
Just that brings to mind. I've done projects where you had architects who you really hadn't created a team. You didn't have an owner, an architect, and a builder on a team. And what will happen is you can get a design from an architect or an engineer, come back, and he's not incorporated none of the AV. We did a project like that, and the first change order on the AV was $500,000.
What?
And
Say that again?
The first change order was $500,000. And that was just on the electrical.
So this is like a shock to the pastor?
It was a shock to everybody.
That's a big shock.
The AV plans had never been coordinated with the electrical plans. And that is the architect's job, is to coordinate those. Well, a lot of architects and builders aren't accustomed to doing churches. And in today's churches, you're doing performing arts. Right. That's really what you're doing. So it is unique. Church building.
So all these things have to be orchestrated and synchronized up front before these numbers should even start being.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And we're used to plugging numbers in because all we do is churches. Like, even if we knew that somebody else was doing the plans, the first thing we'd have in there is sound, lights, and video.
When you have the long delays due to indecision, does that normally involve a committee where people can't agree within the church on things?
Yeah. And sometimes it's the system within the church, and it takes a long time to get everybody together. And takes time for them to meet. A lot of times, once they meet, it don't take long to make the decision. It's just getting them there to meet.
I've heard the term value engineering. What does that entail?
Value engineering is a term that we use in the building industry, where a set of plans will come out, they'll be finished, and at that point, you'll go through the plans and you'll bid it out. The bids come back and they're too high. They can't build it. Maybe it's 100,000 more or 200,000. Then we'll go back through and value engineer it. We take and we meet with the plumbers, the electricians, the heating and air, our guys, and say, what can we take out of this building that won't affect it? I'll give you an example. We were doing one church, and the plans came out, and it had piers under it. And piers, then you got to have pier caps, and then you got to have grade beams and all this. So as we looked at it, we thought, well, we could take the grade beam and mix it into the pier cap, and that's just from guys in construction trying to do it easier. We proposed that to the architects and the engineers. They liked the idea. It saved $250,000. So you take $250,000 out of a foundation and put it in the building. Here's the thing that we say. We say that we really never save on money because they just reallocate it. But our goal is to save you money so that you can reallocate it, so that you can put it in the sound, lights, and video, and in the stage, in the lobby, in the places you need it.
Speaking of money, here's the big question.
Oh, my goodness.
Any industry that involves money, there's always, bait and switch. There's always somebody coming in with an offer, we'll do this for this amount, but then you get all these other costs piled on. What do pastors need to know to not basically get ripped off? And how can they make sure that they're really getting a square deal from a builder, from an architect, from a contractor, from all these different, how do you do the pricing? How does all that work?
So I think the biggest problem is just lack of knowledge about our industry. One thing we hear quite a bit is they'll say, what is your fee? And I always tell the story about architects because I don't like to talk about ourselves too much.
Okay.
But they'll ask the architect, well, what's your fee? He'll say 5% or 6% or 7%, whatever their fee is. And they'll go with the cheaper architect. But that 1% could cost you 20-25% in the fact of hiring an architect who's not done churches. Maybe he's done municipal buildings. Maybe he's just not prepared. Mm-hmm. And you go and you get a building that's way over designed. Mm-hmm. You know, I was going through the airport the other day, and I'm looking at the in Dallas, looking at the terrazzo, mm-hmm. and they really, it is a beautiful job in there. Mm-hmm. But the terrazzo can cost you $50 to $100 a square foot.
I don't know what terrazzo is. I'm acting intelligent. I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's a tile.
Oh, tile. Okay.
But that can cost you $50 to $100 a square foot right there. And if you get that spec'd into your building, and a lot of times what I find is that there's not enough communication with the from the architect to the owner, mm-hmm. and things get spec'd that the owner never knew about. Mm-hmm. I had a black tile, and I showed a pastor 2 different tiles, one that was spec'd, one that wasn't spec'd. Mm-hmm. Both of them were black tiles. He said, "What's the difference?" I said, $4 a square foot. Okay, because the one vinyl tile was less than $1 a square foot. Mm-hmm. The other one was over $4. Mm-hmm. And so those are the type of things that you really have to look out for, and know what you're getting, know what's being priced. Mm-hmm. And there's in our industry, there's just way too many ways to add fees and to add numbers. Mm-hmm. And so that initial conversation, I don't think it should be about money. Mm-hmm. I think it should be about gaining knowledge about mm-hmm. what you're going to get, the character of the company you're going to work mm-hmm. with.
It seems like it'd be very easy in this industry to present a price that reflects something that is very different than what somebody else would build. So that some person says, "I'll build this for you yes. at this amount per square foot," but it's really not what they want, and then they're going to have to get all these add-ons. Yes. And so how do people make sure that it's a comparison of apples to apples when they're getting differing bids and that type of thing?
You know, I think that's really hard for an owner to do, because I don't think that they have the experience to go in and qualify the bids. The one thing that we spend a lot of time doing is qualifying bids. We go through the windows, and there's all kinds of exclusions nowadays in mm-hmm. bids. They'll exclude 30 items. We go through all those to make sure they're not excluding the things they need to exclude, mm-hmm. make sure they're incorporating the things they need to incorporate. I think it's a lifetime of learning, and, mm-hmm. and you really have to have somebody to go through those bids for you. That's what we do.
When it comes to establishing a plan, do you encourage people to reach for the stars and go for the absolute maximum that they could possibly build, or how, what's reasonable?
I think what I encourage churches to do is sit down and put their vision on paper, mm-hmm. but identify what's different between their vision and what their need is, mm-hmm. and then the next step is what you can afford. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's 3 steps: your vision, your need, and then what you can actually afford. But put your vision on paper. There's nothing wrong with that. I call that master planning. Mm-hmm. And then come back and incorporate the things you need. Mm-hmm. And then look at the budget, and then do a real set of plans based on the budget.
You talked about the one church that encountered the $500,000 unexpected fee. Yeah. What are some of the big shockers that pastors and churches sometimes get, where they say, "I didn't know we were going to have to pay for this"?
Yes.
What are some of those hidden things that come out in painful and distressing ways?
Yeah, well, I think the projects we work on, we try to identify those. Our goal is to put our arms around all the costs. When I say all the costs, we want to identify, is there any wetlands on your property? Well, that's one of the first things we want to do. We want to identify, is there any flood zones, any creeks, any this, any that.
Ancient burial grounds.
You know, we had a church that they said the Union went across the property, the Union Army. they thought went across the property, and it cost $500,000. Okay, 468, something like that. I'll just round it up to 500,000. We want
because the Union Army went across.
Supposedly, they thought they did.
So who'd the money go to?
I'm not sure, but they did pay it. They did pay it. And so those are the types of things that we want to uncover, discover before you get too far along in the process. When you get down to sticks, bricks, steel, we can count that pretty good. Mm-hmm. We can get you real close. It's those other costs that we really have a problem finding. Mm-hmm. But they still come out of your budget. Mm-hmm. Because it's all the money you have. Mm-hmm. And that's what some people, they're looking for building cost. You should be looking at completed project cost. Mm-hmm. What's this project going to cost us?
You said so many things already, but is there any bottom line thought that you would say to a pastor who's getting ready to jump into this adventure?
I would say take your time. Get a good team around you. When I say a team, that means people from your church. Maybe it's an employee. I've worked with churches that had a great employee that worked with them who really helped out on the project. An architect, an engineer, and a builder. Mm-hmm. Get yourself a good team and start from there. Develop all the costs. Mm-hmm. Develop what you want, and you'll have a really good project if you go in with a good understanding of what it's going to cost and what you really know you're going to get. Then you won't be surprised at the end. Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank you for watching this interview with us. And whether you're a pastor, a church administrator, a construction manager who's helping a church, we trust this has been very helpful to you. And I just want to encourage you to check out the Daniels and Daniels website. And I'm sure we'll be running that information somewhere here. And also, I believe a series of interviews, the Building Forward series, and you can check all that out on the link below. Charlie, thank you so much.
Thank you
for sharing with our audience today.